Hi, and welcome to the CAFMA Connect. I'm your host, Fire Chief Scott Freitag. Back with me this week, 2 weeks in a row, John.
Well, I wasn't ready for that intro. I think I was looking off into space.
That's all right. It
doesn't change much, yeah.
I was just happy that, because normally when you come on, the ratings go way down when it's you and I, but last week we got almost 200 views so far. Of course, we were talking about mandatory overtime, which is something that irritates people. So
Indeed. I'm just trying to kill the podcast one at a time, just by being here.
Well, and that way, if you take over as fire chief at some point, you can just say, no, this didn't work.
Clearly, it was not helpful. So
it was a trial run, and we failed.
Yeah.
Actually, it wasn't us. It was Freitag that failed.
Well, sure.
I get it. Perfectly. Absolutely. So a couple of things to talk about. So one, we were talking about this before we came on, but some may have noticed that the medications I'm taking, and there are some interactions with that. We're not going to go delve too deep into them.
Thank you.
I can still drive. That's good. But,
yes.
My face tends to swell up, and it causes rashes and stuff like that.
I thought you were just mad.
Yeah. No, my face has been bright red lately. Like, people are like, were you out in the sun? No. My face is turning bright red. I'm not sure why.
But on a positive note, yeah,
I'm blushing.
On a positive note, you did, talk about how this is all your medications have been reported to HR. And,
yes.
So if anything comes up, obviously it makes it easier.
Well, and why is that important, John? What have we seen lately?
I thought we were talking about something else.
We are.
Oh, okay.
But let's cover this because you mentioned it.
All right.
Let's talk about it real quick.
Like we ask, obviously, everybody to provide that information, because some of the times the meds that folks are on need to be vetted by the doctor, just insurance,
right.
Because there's an NFPA standard on Class A, Class B, and what medications you shouldn't be on while you're working in the fire service. Second part of it is every now and then we have somebody that may pop positive for a drug test for something on it that's on a regular medication.
Right.
If we don't have that medication listed, it's much more difficult to vet the issue than if we know it's already listed, it's already been vetted by the doctor. It makes a positive drug test for any reason
right.
Much easier to be like, no, that makes sense to everybody.
Right.
And so we've had to deal with that a couple times recently where it's like, well, we don't have any of that medication. So then there's that level of speculation, like, well, we need to do the full comprehensive to make sure that all that makes sense.
Right.
And then all gets sent to the doctor. So it makes the process easier if for some reason there is a requirement for a drug test. Because we do it for injuries, we do it for damaged equipment, not just because somebody might be suspected of something,
right.
but there are some standard procedures
Sure.
why we would drug test somebody. So if it does come back positive, we all look at it like, all right, no, this has been reported,
sure,
and this is all clear, and we move forward.
It's interesting. At the policy meeting, there was some discussion about, people on the floor are nervous
Sure.
when they have to get a drug test. Well, one, you shouldn't be nervous because you're supposed to be reporting your meds to HR,
Sure.
and they're the only ones that have it. We don't know.
Yeah.
And I'll give you an example. I take the Kirkland allergy med every day, but it's an over-the-counter. I have to show my driver's license because it does have ephedrine in it.
Yeah.
So I need to report that to HR, and I have that, hey, I take this. It's an over-the-counter, but that way if I do crash the car and get drug tested for some reason and I pop positive for something with ephedrine or like meth, then no, this is the Kirkland allergy med.
And that ephedrine will show up on a drug test.
Right. So if you're not taking anything illegal and you've reported your meds to HR, then there's no reason to be nervous if you have to get tested because of an accident or injury. And we've changed the policy now, as long as the board approves it, where if you simply injure yourself, we aren't necessarily doing a drug test.
Yeah.
So
no, I think that'll help clean it up, because we have had some times when we've drug tested, and I think it's not necessarily important to do that in those circumstances. It makes the whole process more cumbersome to try to get somebody some help and get them, just healing in the whatever injury they have.
Right.
So I think that's been a good cleanup. And you mentioned as far as like that medication, it's not that we care what medication they're on. We care that whatever medication somebody is on is appropriate to be on.
Sure.
And there's times, like we've talked about, where somebody will provide some medication by a doctor who may not realize that they work for the fire department, and people have been prescribed medication that really wasn't conducive to being on an engine, doing the work, or driving, operating heavy machinery. So a lot of times that stuff gets sent to our department physician to say, hey, take a look at this. Is this appropriate?
Right.
And what oftentimes happens if something is, not appropriate for the work environment, all of really our doctor ends up helping the employee do is go back to your primary care and help them understand this one probably isn't the best medication to be on. There may be better medication to be on, and so that they can work with their primary care physician to get what's appropriate.
Yeah. Our goal is to keep you on the engine, but make sure you're functional and can work safely on the engine is all we're trying to do. And there are alternative medications, just like me with the rheumatoid arthritis. We're going to have to try different medications until we figure out which one works for me that has the least number of side effects. Yeah. So, I mean, some of the side effects right now say, when I looked at them yesterday, they're like, you should call your doctor. I haven't done that yet because I work for the fire department and, we're slow to learn. Yeah. So I may give them a call later. But, when we have something like that, or it's not an appropriate medication to be on a fire engine with, there's alternatives. Oh, yeah. There's another way to treat it. And I don't know what you're on. It's not for me to know. Sure. You don't know what they're on. Nope. The only person that knows what somebody's on would be our HR manager. That's it.
Yep. I do find out what somebody's on when they don't report it.
Right.
And we end up having to do a little bit more of an investigation. That's when I have to get involved.
So. Which takes a lot of time.
It does.
We don't want to do
that. It's unnecessary. It's unnecessary to the employee.
Right.
And obviously, the employer side, HR, it just creates unnecessary challenges.
Right.
So report the medication.
Yeah. Pretty simple and straightforward.
Yeah.
So on to the topic of today. And do you want to make the sound effects, Jonah, related to 310?
I'll insert them.
Okay, perfect. Yes, we have sound effects.
Sound effects now.
Basically, this is what it sounds like to fail when you put a proposition in. And that's exactly what happened to 310. It failed. It was close.
Yeah.
But close only counts, from what I've heard, in horseshoes and hand grenades.
Correct.
And neither of those were part of this. So I guess the first thing I want to talk about, John, is that I did an interview with Cronkite News yesterday, and they said, so now that Prop 310 has failed, as a follow-up, what do you expect to happen statewide? And the very simple answer is property taxes are going to go up. They're going to go up in our jurisdiction because the state did raise the cap on property tax from $325 up to it'll be $375 next year. Mm-hmm. I see property taxes going up across the state. That's what's going to happen. Sure. A lot of folks push back. They don't like property taxes. They certainly don't want to see them go up.
Yeah. None of us do.
But we're funded by property tax, and unless we have a diversified revenue source, the only option we have to meet demand and provide services as our costs increase is to increase property tax.
Yeah, like I say, there was 310 provide the opportunity to diversify funding, but obviously that the voters spoke, and that didn't pass. But that doesn't change what we've continued to talk about even last week, which is the staffing challenges.
Right.
And it's not just throwing more people at a problem; it's trying to look at the growing response times,
right, the
growing response area that we have, and the growth. Yeah. And we have to meet that. And unfortunately, that requires a cost to do that. But that's the impact, obviously, to a growing community that is funded by property taxes. There's a difficulty in sometimes even getting those taxes in a regular fashion.
Right. Well, and we just had our ISO review that showed we are not getting an effective firefighting force on scene. That Prescott's not, we're not, and so. How do we get an effective firefighting force on scene? Well, we have to add more people to our engines. Our data shows, as we've talked about from the beginning, and in fairness to everybody, we've said from the start of educating about Prop 310 that we're 1 24-hour engine behind. Mm-hmm. And if we pass Prop 310, then we can fund those positions through sales tax. If not, then we're going to have to incrementally increase the property tax rate over the next several years in order to hire the 15 people that we need. On top of that, we need 5 people just today to round out the shifts, 5 brand new positions.
Sure, yeah. Well, yes, look at the 5 that we've talked about for a number of times. We tried the SAFER grant, that we weren't able to get the SAFER grant, which would have helped with that funding. We've tried, obviously, 310. We limited options. We certainly did try a number of ways to try to increase the staffing. And for those folks that don't understand, like the ISO, the insurance, that affects the insurance rating and your insurance costs for your home. And that's an outside review of our operations. And obviously, I think with any time that you have tax-funded entities, you want those monies to be used wisely.
Right.
And you look at what we've done. We've operated, I think, even as CAFMA, very trying to use the money to the best of our ability.
Absolutely.
But at the same time, the critique from the ISO was that we are not getting an effective response force. We are doing the job, but with less people than is even recommended by an outside review based on our insurance ratings.
And that outside review is the minimum. I mean, that's the bare minimum standard. So we're not even meeting the bare minimum standard to get people on scene. No, we are looking at alternative means to deal with or address the increase in call volume. And one, we do need another 24-hour engine. That's part of the data, right? That's 15. We need 5 to round up the shifts. But we've also been talking to Priority about alternative response units because as the call volume continues to increase, there's more utilization of the 911 system that doesn't necessarily require transport of a patient to the hospital.
Sure.
But they do need some sort of care. If we can respond rather than in the fire engine, respond in a pickup that has 2 people, an EMT and a paramedic, we may be able to reduce some of the strain on the overall system and possibly reduce some of the strain on the emergency rooms in the area. So those are great ideas, I think, when we look nationally how they're being utilized and how we want to utilize them.
Yep.
But that still requires positions, and that requires money.
Sure, yeah. And you look at the other things we've done, including 540, which is a 40-hour engine company that we've put in place during the higher call volume times to try to help with that workload, but also help with that response force, because when an engine goes to training or some other event, we're using that engine to cover those areas because we do cover a very large area. We're not a condensed, tight city community. We cover a lot of area, 360 plus miles that we cover with 10 stations. That's a lot of rural community that's sometimes hard to cover. So we've used that 40-hour engine to help cover those response times and those areas to try to help with the overall response reliability.
Well, and it's interesting, John. We just had a fire out in Chino not long ago, heavily involved detached garage when the engines arrived on scene. It was in 61's first due area, but 62 was the first engine in because 61 was out of quarters.
Sure.
And that goes to what we call reliability rating. What's our reliability rating? How often is that first due engine in quarter to respond to a call? Yeah. Well, there were some questions on social media from some of the community about what took so long for the fire department to get here.
Sure.
Now, response times still weren't bad, but it was certainly longer than 61 getting there because 62 had to come in. Well, that's part of what we're looking at, especially in some of our more densely populated, busier areas, like Prescott Valley right now. We're seeing an extended response time because those engines aren't in their first due areas. They're pulled to other places.
Sure.
And so if we can add an engine to the system that can add to the effective firefighting response force, that can maintain engines, not all the time, but a little more often their first due area, or at least backfill from a closer distance, because we've talked about it before. When we look at the north side of Prescott Valley, so when Glassford Hill goes through under 89A, we would like to put a station on the other side. We think that's a good spot. What people would point out and what we initially discussed was, hey, maybe we need to move engine 59 because they're going to be within a mile and a half of each other. But when you actually start looking at it, and you brought it up, when we start drawing those circles to show where gaps are in the system, if we move 59, we've created another big gap. Maybe the thought process needs to be, and this is the thought process that we should actually have, is that some of those response circles need to overlap in order to provide coverage.
Sure.
And so it's a different approach than what's been used up here in the past, just because of the vast area we cover, but there are things we have to look at.
Yeah, like anything else, we have to adjust to the growing community as well.
Right.
Just from the standpoint of management and our mindset. We are growing beyond just a rural fire department just the Prescott Valley, Chino Valley, both areas are growing.
Absolutely.
And we have to respond to that growth, and we have to sometimes adjust our mindset and our model to how we respond to those areas.
Yeah, and the Dewey area is growing as well.
Absolutely.
As part of the last census, it showed that we were estimated to have a population of 106,500 people.
Yeah.
That's not a small rural agency. Sure. The challenge we have is the area that 106,500 people are dispersed in, and trying to cover those gaps. But as we get more densely populated, and yes, there's a little bit of a slowdown we see on the horizon right now, just because of the economy. But overall, if you talk to Brad Fain, they're going to see a little bit of a dip, maybe a leveling, but it's going to come back up.
Sure.
So we need to be prepared to handle the demand for services. Yeah. I mean, people complain today that even our roadways weren't built to handle the demand for services. Well, it's no different with the fire department. You can't get from here to Prescott in 15 minutes. There's too much traffic. Yeah. And that traffic slows us down on our responses as well, which is why we're putting in Opticom, different topic. But the bottom line is we have to increase the number of personnel we have in equipment to meet demand. The only way that we can fund that is through property taxes. Yep. And we need to increase revenue, which means we need to increase property taxes. And no one likes to hear that, but unfortunately it's reality. And we pointed this out as part of the 310 conversation, but when you look at the growth in the area and you look along 69 or you look at Jasper, all those new rooftops, they get free fire protection for 3 years.
Sure.
So we have to provide the service and meet the demand, but because of the way the property taxes are structured, we don't actually see any revenues from that for 3 years.
Yeah. Yeah. Like I say, that comes down to the structural challenge of being funded by property tax. The other side too that we continue to look at is how do we be more efficient with our operations as well. Go back to the engines being busy out of their area. One of the things we've looked at and we've been having conversations with Prescott Valley is our model of servicing hydrants.
Yes.
Obviously, we need to change that model. When we originally made the agreement with Prescott Valley, we had 300 plus hydrants. There's now 1,800?
23, 2,400?
23. So the model that we used is, and we haven't added that, many engines.
No. So
the model that we use, we need to adjust. So we are trying to look at other areas as well to create those efficiencies, to make sure those engines are available. And that work is being done, but it's not, like you say, not just looking at, hey, we need more money for the sake of funding, trying to look at all aspects of the organization to say, hey, what can we be more efficient on? So that way, when we are looking for that funding, it's the last step in that process versus the first step.
Right.
Because sometimes for the easy step is, hey, we need more money, we need more people. It's not looking at that, as like, hey, that's the first step we're going to take.
Right.
We've taken a lot of steps to try to look at the efficiency of the organization. Right. How do we make adjustments with what we're doing? How do we partner with other, community members to do this before we take that step?
Yeah. And we want to thank our constituents because largely we had a lot of support. A lot of people understood and were supportive. We still lost, but it wasn't by like a landslide loss on our part. So there's a lot of people out there who support us, and we're not trying to say, hey, you didn't vote for this, therefore your property taxes are going to go up. It's we don't have a diversified revenue source. We told you what we needed. Those needs still exist. The question was, how do you want to fund them? And the answer that we got back was through property tax. So that's what we have to deal with is working with property tax. Now, there's another side to this, and I'm going to say it. I'm already on thin ice talking about property taxes going up. So, John, you may be able to kill the podcast in the next couple of weeks because people may say you're fired. But
wait, to me or to you?
To me.
Okay.
Yeah. We cannot charge impact fees for all of the development. We've talked about that before. Development does not pay for development. The sales revenue is going to help us bolster that capital reserve account so that we can buy new engines, buy the equipment that we need, SCBAs. But it doesn't fund fire stations at today's construction costs, which are somewhere between 7 and 10 million, depending on what you build, where you're at.
Yeah.
And we know building costs up here are more expensive just because we're up here.
That's the nature of it, yeah.
And there's not a way through property tax that we can fund the construction of new infrastructure that we need. So my projection is in the next 3 to 4 years, we're going to have to look at, I know nobody wants to hear this, a bond, because a bond is going to be the only way that we can fund the infrastructure that we need to meet demand.
And a bond is voter approved.
It is voter
So
approved.
they still, no matter what our desire is, they still have the opportunity to weigh in on that decision. So it's not certainly like we are doing something that is outside of the input from the community.
No, absolutely.
But I agree with you.
Yeah, we're going to have to look at how we fund that. And I know that in this area, the school districts really struggle to try to get bonds through. We were successful. I wasn't here at the time, but CYFD and Chino, respectively, were successful in getting bonds through last time for infrastructure. Yep. They used the monies for exactly what they told the taxpayers they were going to use it for. And that has been a benefit to the overall community because they were able to grow and meet the needs.
Yeah.
Well, we're at that point again. We're about ready to retire CYFD's bonds. We're a fire authority, so CYFD and Chino still exists. So when we talk about a bond and we need to build stations in Prescott Valley area, it's CYFD residents that are going to have to vote on that bond because those are specific expenses related to their community and demand in their community.
Yep. No, and I think that's a good distinction to kind of point out as well. So that way there's been some conversations related to the two entities still existing in the past. And so that way it's very clear that if the monies were going towards building a station in Prescott Valley, the Prescott Valley residents would be able to vote on any movement related to a bond for that area. So, like I say, go back to even the past that was used to take that next step forward to pay for that infrastructure because it's very difficult, no different than personally. Obviously, everybody's dealing with inflation, the challenges of rising costs. No one wants additional taxes, but at the same time, we are also dealing with those same rising costs.
Absolutely.
From fuel costs that are rising to just building a station.
Yeah.
We can't... we're having a hard time, like say, year to year, just to maintain the staffing and the level of personnel that we have, let alone to say, hey, no, in 5 years from now, we're going to build a $5 million fire station, $7 million fire station. It's becoming very difficult to plan that out with that capital reserves.
It's even difficult right now to plan out the new staff vehicles. So if we look at some of the Ram trucks we just bought, it took 2 or 3 years to finally be able to buy them. And of course, they were over budget because inflation.
Oh, yeah.
So there are still some significant challenges that we face with just the cost of doing business. And somebody said, I heard that someone in the community had said, that fire department's too expensive. Well, it's really an unqualified statement because unless you're coming in and sitting down and visiting and actually looking through the budget line by line, which we have out there for the public to see, you can't say that this is it's not cheap.
Yeah,
having fire protection.
Yeah, it may be more expensive than obviously they believe should be paid, but at the same time, are you looking at what the costs are to run an organization, run a professional fire department? And probably the answer is probably no.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. When you look at what we do as a fire district, fire authority, it's different than a fire department. But when you talk about, and I've heard people say, well, you just need to, the municipality should have their own, which is interesting to me because coming out of the St. Louis area, all the municipalities in St. Louis County, or a majority of them, had their own fire departments, all one station.
Sure.
And so you cannot, that's not an efficient system when you look at, you have a fire chief, overhead staff, admin staff, all of this within a city that has one fire station. They can't even respond to a first alarm assignment in their city without all the surrounding jurisdictions
coming in. Yeah.
So the reality is something like an Orange County Fire Authority setup where those entities all come together, it creates more efficiencies. But if you look at Orange County Fire Authority, that is not a cheap venture for those municipal governments. And in fact, one of the municipal governments a couple of years ago pulled out because they felt the costs were too much.
Yeah.
So on one hand, some would say every municipal department or every municipality should have their own fire department, which isn't going to work. It's not functional. There should be more consolidations, mergers, fire authorities, something to bring people together. But then when you put all that together, there's a cost to running all that when you combine it. Yeah. And then some folks will say, well, that it's just too expensive to run. Well, But then they'll call 911. What took you so long?
Indeed, yeah.
So there's a balance that must be struck. I think we do a decent job with that.
Correct.
But there's certainly challenges as we move forward and as we look at the number of people that we need to hire to provide services.
Yeah, and I think, like you say, you've named a few different numbers. It's nothing crazy. It's just trying to incrementally grow with the community. And again, obviously being challenged with just the property tax, we have to look at how we do that. The second part of it is, like you say, I think we do a fairly good job in our area with not trying to grow beyond what is reasonable.
Right.
It's not like we've tried to gather up every department in the area that may be struggling that wants our help, and it's not for a lack of people asking. But we've said no to some of those departments. That no, what we have created, we feel like is sustainable right now and is appropriate right now. It doesn't mean that might not be looked at in the future, but we've said no to those. And I think that sometimes people don't understand. Like, there's been departments that have approached, communities that have approached, and we've turned them down because we feel what we have right now is sustainable and is running well. We'll continue to do better, and as far as improvement, but it's not trying to go capture every little bit they can.
And we don't approach other agencies asking them if they want to be part of this. The only time that conversation comes up is if an agency comes to us and says, hey, we would like to become part of this, then we do our due diligence. And in the times that we've done that, we've had to say, no, this doesn't fit the model for us for sustainability. And I think that's important. So a lot of things we looked at, we'll just kind of close off with what's our plan and what is our need. And I think you and I talked. We need 5 firefighters to round out the shifts that we currently have. We need 15 to put up a new engine, so there's 20. If we look at the ARU concept, which would decrease some of the strain on the overall system without putting a second engine up right away, there's another 2 because we would partner with Priority for that. Sure. So there's 22. And then if we get the ambulance part really, though, is separate because that generates revenue to pay for those positions. So not relevant, but it's additional positions that we need. A couple of things to look at. One is, do we put a SAFER grant in for 20 positions? And if we get them, then because SAFER goes for 3 years, we have 3 years of incremental tax increases. In the 4th year, we're responsible for the whole of the cost. If we don't get the SAFER grant, or we decide not to go that route, then we incrementally increase the tax rate along the way anyways. Sure. But we may hire like 5, 7, and 8.
Yes.
And part of the conversation I think that you and I and senior staff need to have on this is, okay, SAFER grant for 20 positions sounds awesome, and we hire them all at one time. The challenge is, can we get 20 candidates? And if we have a SAFER grant that's for 20 and we can't fill 20 positions, then we have a challenge.
And actually 20 doesn't sound that good to me. Just from the logistical challenges, in trying to train and make sure that we divide up even the probationary employees to different engines. I think no matter what we do, obviously, like I say, it may be we do a jump and we have to overcome that. But at the same time, I do like that incremental growth where we're trying to maintain the standards that we have now, and it's not sacrifice for the sake of just trying to add people to a problem. But no matter what, obviously, like I say, we need to vet that whole concept and what we want to do, because we do have to do something.
And we may want to push that number up to 22, where we hire 7, and 8. Yeah, and the reason for that would be round out the shifts with 5, but have the personnel we could put up the ARU.
Sure.
And run those 2 units. And we want to partner with Prescott with that as well, because they want to put up an ARU. Yep. So we could end up with 3 ARUs in the system that could cross jurisdictional boundaries to ensure we're making coverage for low acuity calls, decreasing some of that strain on the 24-hour engines. Doesn't change the fact that we need another 24-hour engine.
Sure.
So a lot of stuff to talk about.
Yep.
Challenges moving forward. We do thank the community for the overall support, because I truly feel that the CAFMA community, those that are in it, absolutely support us. This is a bad economic time to ask for 1/10 cent sales tax. Absolutely. It's a bad economic time to raise property taxes as well, but we still have to meet that demand. Excuse me. We said an issue exists. Here's what we need to do. Yeah. The voting no on 310 to the sales tax doesn't change the need, and so we're going to have to do something. But With that, hopefully that'll help with our mandatory overtime, because I know there's a lot of overtime again this week.
Yep.
We need to get our 7 injured people back, and we need to get the 10 out of the recruit academy.
Yes.
Working hard. I appreciate your time. To everybody out there, don't forget to like and subscribe. Until next week, I don't know, watch this. Jonah, you have anything?
No.
Perfect.